My name is François René de Chateaubriand. I was born in Brittany, Saint-Malo, 1768. I'm a descendant of one of the oldest families in France. One of my ancestors went on a crusade with Louis IX in 1251. Because of his valor, the king allowed him to integrate the fleur-de-lis into the family arms. I hate to admit that I belong to the impoverished branch of the family. My father was a ship boy at the age of 15 and traveled all over the world. He served on a privateer, became a captain on a privateer, and shipped African slaves to the Caribbean. 35 years old, he had become a ship owner, bought a Chateau Combourg, married my mother, and opened his office in the Rue du Juif, Saint-Malo. Saint-Malo. It's here that I was brought up, as a companion of the waves and the winds. One of the first pleasures I ever tasted was battling with the storms, playing with the waves which retreated before me or chased after me on the shore. On feast days, I was to be taken with my sister on a pilgrimage to the various shrines in the city. The sweet voices of a few women hidden from sight fell upon my ear. The music of their canticles with the roaring of the waves. When between these songs, the Christmas-tide squalls battered the stained glass windows of the basilica, shaking the roof of the nave, which had once echoed the lusty voice of Jacques Cartier, I experienced a strange feeling of religion. I shared all these impressions with my sister Lucie. Once, sensing a certain loneliness in me, she said, "You ought to write these impressions down." That remark revealed the muse to me. I began stammering out poetry, as if it had been my natural language. I created a dream world of my own. I filled my days with colors, sounds, rhythm, fantasy. But you're probably not particularly interested in the romantic fantasies of an adolescent. Let me therefore tell you something about the martial side of my career. In 1786, I became the second lieutenant of the Navarre Infantry Regiment, stationed in northern France. In that capacity, I was introduced at the court of Versailles. The door of the king's bedroom opened. I was introduced to the king when he came towards me on the way to Mass. I bowed deeply. Marshal Duras presented me. Sire, Chevalier de Chateaubriand. The king looked at me, returned my bow, hesitated, and appeared to be on the point of stopping to speak to me. But he didn't. Can you imagine? This powerful monarch which I was seeing was less than 6 years removed from the scaffold. Then we hurried to the gallery to see Queen Marie Antoinette on her way to the chapel. She was beautiful, beautiful, and delighted with life. Oh, vanity of human life. Those beautiful hands, which bore with such grace the sceptre of the king, were destined, before being bound by the executioner, to mend her rags as a prisoner in the conciergerie. where I was during the Revolution. I was in Paris. I reached the city where the opening of the General Estates took place in Versailles. At that time, the Parisians were already up in arms. They objected to the 20,000 mercenaries which the king had stationed around the city to maintain law and order, as food scarcities constantly led to riots. The Parisians feared the worst. Local militia started to arm themselves. They forced themselves into the Hôtel des Invalides. Muskets and ammunition were distributed, but they could find no gunpowder. Gunpowder was stored in the Bastille. The next morning, on the 14th of July, the crowd stormed the old prison. A few days later, I was standing at the window of my hotel. A troop of ragamuffins appeared at the end of the street. From the midst of this troop, there rose a couple of standards, which I couldn't clearly see at the distance. As they came nearer, I made out two disfigured heads, each at the end of a pike. The murderers stopped in front of me and stretched the pikes up towards me, singing, dancing, jumping up, in order to bring the pale effigies closer to my face. One eye of one of the heads was hanging down the dead man's cheek. The pike was projecting through the open mouth, the teeth of which were biting on the iron. I felt no sympathy for these cannibal feasts, no sympathy whatsoever. The human race danced in the streets in a holiday mood. Having got rid of its schoolmaster, it had returned to a state of nature, and it will not see the need for any social restraints again until it bears the yoke of new tyrants. The idea of leaving France for some distant land began to take root in my mind. The idea of going to America. We weighed the anchor. My gaze remained fixed on Saint-Malo, where I had left my mother in tears. I could see the steeples and the domes of the churches, where I prayed with my sister Lucille. The walls, the ramparts, the towers, the beaches, where I spent my childhood with my playmates. I was abandoning my storm-tossed country. I was going away, equally uncertain about my country's destiny and my own. Which of us was to perish? France or I? Should I ever see France and my family again? The ship rolled at the mercy of the slow and silent waves. Thousands of stars shining in the dark blue of the heavenly dome. A boundless sea. Never has God impressed me with his greatness more than during those nights, when I had the immensity over my head and the immensity beneath my feet. On the 8th of April, 1791, we arrived at Chesapeake Bay, America. a negress, 13 or 14 years of age, practically naked, and singularly beautiful, greeted me with a smile. An African slave girl welcomed me to the American soil of liberty. America, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, Boston. In Philadelphia, I met George Washington. Tall in stature, calm and cold rather than noble in bearing. He really resembles his portraits. I handed him my letter of introduction in silence. He opened it, and his eyes went straight to the signature, which he read aloud, exclaiming, "Ah, Colonel Armand. I feel fortunate indeed that his gaze has fallen upon me. I felt warmed by it for the rest of my life. There was virtue in the gaze of this great man." But visiting the American cities, I felt a void. What is missing in these Protestant cities of the United States? I think great works of architecture. The Reformation has rarely erected those domes, airy naves, twin towers with which the old Catholic religion has crowned Europe. But in America, nature is overwhelming. I went to see the Niagara Falls. I stopped at the very edge of the water, which was going past with the swiftness of an arrow. It didn't foam, but glided in a solid mass over the sloping rock. Its silence before the fall contrasted with the roar of the fall itself. Here, there are no roads, no cities, no monarchy, no kings, no people. Never before did I regard the earth as a mother. But here in America, I realized that we come forth from her womb. In childhood, she holds us to her breasts, which are swollen with milk and honey. In youth and manhood, she lavishes upon us her cool waters, her harvests, her fruits. And when we die, she opens her arms to us again and throws a cover of grass and flowers over our remains, and secretly transforms us into her own substance to be reproduced in some new and graceful shape. November 1791. The flight of the king. French royal family tries to flee the country. Stopped at the border. Those were the headlines I read in American newspapers. The flight of the king. My God! And in a voice told me, go back to France. The country is in danger. On board ship, I thought I would never see my beloved France again. We were in the midst of a tempest. The crew included some French sailors. One of them, in the absence of a chaplain, started the singing of the hymn of Our Lady, which was one of the first things I had learned as a child. I sing it again, in sight of the coast of Brittany, almost under my mother's eyes. The American Protestant sailors joined in the singing with their French Catholic mates. Danger teaches us how small we are. It unites us in prayer. The great wave came towards us, stretching the whole width of the channel, rolling high without breaking, like one sea invading the other. Big white birds made their appearance like birds of death. The ship touched and stuck. On board ship, there was complete silence. Every face turned pale. The great swell arrived. Just as it touched us, the sailor put down the helm. The ship, on the point of falling on her side, presented her stern, and the swell, which seems about to engulf us, lifted her up and over. A cheer rose to the heavens above, and we added a shout of, "Long live the King!" Long live the King. God didn't hear it. He didn't hear it for Louis XVI. France had changed beyond recognition. The revolution was no longer in its infancy. I saw people marching drunkenly to its destiny, across abysses and by uncertain roads. It was threatening. In the streets, one met only frightened or ferocious faces. Timid eyes were turned away from you, or else grim eyes gazed into yours in order to fathom your secrets. My brother Jean-Baptiste and I, we joined the Royalists. When I was seriously injured, I went into exile in England. In 1793, Louis XVI was beheaded. Brother Jean-Baptiste was guillotined even before Marie Antoinette had to bend her head for the revolutionary acts. I didn't return to France until Napoleon had ended the Reign of Terror. During the exile, my mother had died. When I returned to Saint-Malo, my sister described my mother's deathbed. My way of life had agonized her. The idea that I had poisoned the last days of the woman who bore me in her womb filled me with despair. As she lay dying, she instructed my sister to recall me to the religion in which I was brought up. Wouldn't you respect such a wish? A nobleman from Brittany stepped forward in defense of his holy mother, the Church. In 1802, I published Le Génie du Christianisme, Genius of Christianity. As my book rallied the Christian forces in the country, the Minister of the Interior invited me to attend a reception at the Louvre Palace. I was in the gallery when Napoleon entered. I had never seen him before, except at a distance. His smile was gentle and beautiful. His eyes admirable, particularly the way in which they were set beneath his forehead and framed by his eyebrows. Le Génie du Christianisme, which had been making a considerable stir, must have struck a chord in Napoleon. Bonaparte saw me and recognized me. I still don't know how. When he came towards me, no one knew whom he was making for. Rank after rank opened up. Each person hoped that Napoleon would stop at him. I hid behind my neighbors. Bonaparte suddenly raised his voice and said, "Monsieur de Chateaubriand." So I met a man of the last century and the men of the new century, Washington and Napoleon. For a moment, I conversed with both. Washington never disappointed me. Napoleon certainly did. Washington never raised himself above the happiness of the people he had freed. Napoleon did. His sole aim was to become the master of the world. From the moment he crowned himself Emperor of France, I opposed him. Unlike that other citizen of Saint-Malo, Robert Surcouf, he was Napoleon's favorite privateer, but I liked him. And I wouldn't be surprised if you would meet him while walking alongside the ramparts of my beloved city of Saint-Malo. If you do, I will be watching over you from Grand-Bré's Island, my peaceful resting place, where I'm still battling with the storms, playing with the waves, which once retreated before me or chased after me on the shore, listening to the waves, meditating on its eternal silence.